On this episode of the Turnbuckle, WWE hasn't made any creative plans for Money in the Bank yet. There's a belief that Vince McMahon is still in charge of the WWE, and Sami Zayn gives his thoughts on the honorary use gimmick. Folks, it's time to hit an emerald flosion into some wrestling news because it's time for the Turnbuckle. Sean Ross Sapp reported on Fightful Select squashing a rumor going around about Money in the Bank. It was reported that while such a thing isn't impossible, there are no current plans to nix the Money in the Bank event. There was also a rumor going around about LA Knight being penciled in to win the Money in the Bank briefcase. According to this report, WWE isn't thinking that far out just yet. In addition, there was a rumor that LA Knight was already penciled in to win Money in the Bank next year. One source we asked took particular exception with saying, quote, "I like LA Knight, but we don't even have definitive plans across the board for months down the line, much less next year's Money in the Bank. If we wanted it on him so bad, it wouldn't have been hard to take theories to put on him. I've never heard him discussed in the same conversation as Money in the Bank. Not that it couldn't happen because he's a great performer, but it's not been discussed." I don't like hearing that they were talking about like, oh, well, if we wanted it so bad, we could have just taken it off a theory. That's not really something that you like want to hear, you know, like, oh, well, if we didn't like this guy, we could just strip him of the title and then just put it on somebody else that we like. Like, I don't think that that's a good thing. I don't think that you want to hear about that. I was under the assumption that Money in the Bank was going to be like a WrestleMania thing and they weren't necessarily going to turn it into like a full gimmicked pay-per-view, but it sounds like they're going to turn it into a pay-per-view still. To be fair, the plans could still just be like who's winning and all that sort of stuff, but I mean, that's pretty much as far as you gotta go because it's happening on WrestleMania and that's pretty much it, you know? Like, I don't think it's like a whole like gimmicked thing. I'm pretty sure it's just like 2 matches, right? No, it would be, well, technically, isn't it like 1 match? But I assume you could do the women's and men's Money in the Bank briefcase match, and you could just sort of throw that on WrestleMania. But would you have it back to back? I don't know. Next, we're going to talk about the belief that Vince McMahon is still involved with the WWE. In a recent interview with Bill Apter, Sergeant Slaughter said he believes that Vince McMahon is still involved with the WWE because there's no way to keep him away given his knowledge of the business. I feel that Vince McMahon's still there and there's no way to keep him away as far as his knowledge of the business goes. If it wasn't for his knowledge, a lot of us wouldn't be doing the things we're doing today. I wish him all the best. He's always been a good friend to me, and then he became a boss, and then he became a friend again. To me, he was part of my life, and is the reason I'm still sitting here talking to you, along with Harley Race. A lot of people are like, hey, he's been really good to me, and he's been really nice, and he's been like a father figure and everything like that, and then you've got other people that are like, oh, he never gives me the time of day, and all this sort of stuff, and he never considers me for anything. So it's really like hot or cold about him, to be totally honest with you. It's sort of like the CM Punk thing. It's like, depending on like who you follow and where you stand, I mean, that sort of like alters your, you know, perception about who Vince McMahon is. You could carry that theory if you really, really wanted to. You could carry that theory. You could argue that Vince, because I said this a while ago. I said this ages ago about how he could potentially just be waiting for everything to like die down and then he just sort of comes back in. You know what I mean? But considering that he's not been in contact with anyone and they've pretty much like removed him of all, you know, they've expunged him essentially of all the WWE goings-ons and what have you, right? It kind of is like hard to believe that he's like still in charge in some way, and a lot of people are like, okay, if he's in charge, then how come he's letting all this stuff happen? And it's like, that was my theory in the sense of he's letting that happen because he's technically not supposed to be here, you know what I mean? He's supposed to be the voice in the ceiling, and then once everything, you know, like goes away, that's when he springs in action. It's like, Sadie. I personally don't think that that's the case. I do genuinely think that he's gone, right? There's no more talk of Vince McMahon. You've got people who are arguing about whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, come on now. It's his business. Let's be honest here, right? I mean, the stuff that he did, right, obviously cannot be excused. But you can't say the WWE without Vince McMahon. Just like how you can't say the WWE without Hulk Hogan and, you know, Macho Man, Andre the Giant, you know what I mean? Like, you can't just ignore all of the history that he's made throughout, I mean, what, the 80 plus years? But listen, I'm not the main of the Hall of Fame guy, man. So, like, I don't have, like, a say in that, so I mean, maybe he will be, maybe he won't be. I mean, give your thoughts in the comments if you think he should be in the Hall of Fame, all right? That's not really my call to make, so. Finally, we're going to be talking about Sami Zayn and how he never thought WWE fans would love the honorary use gimmick so much. While speaking on After the Bell, Sami Zayn talked about his current character and how it did not really make much sense in the beginning. Zayn then added that he never thought WWE fans would love his gimmick so much. It's not something you predict ahead of time. It's not something that you want to see or would think makes sense, but in the execution, it has worked. The concept is a bit strange. All the bloodline is a family, and here's this person who's clearly not family. The whole thing doesn't make sense on paper, but it's the perfect example of when things work in execution more than they do on paper. I'm not entirely surprised at the success of segments that we've done, but it has still exceeded my expectations. I knew it would be good, but I didn't think that fans would take it to the way they have. Sami Zayn is one of those people that I feel like could make almost any gimmick work. He's like your Chris Jericho, your Rock, your Hurricane. Like, would the gimmick be as successful as it is if you would put like Curtis Axel in it? Would the gimmick be as successful as it is if like Baron Corbin was in it? And that goes for like any gimmick. That goes for like the Stone Cold gimmick. Would that gimmick work if it was on like Mick Foley or something? When you think about the Oos gimmick, that's not really something. That's really something that should be like annoying. That's something that shouldn't be getting over. Like New Day. New Day technically shouldn't have gotten over because they just came out there and were talking about positivity and they were like, you know, a church gimmick and all that sort of stuff. That shouldn't have gotten as over as it did. But it was their personality and it was the way that they carried themselves on the mic that really like actually carried them over the edge. You know what I mean? Like, would that have worked if you had given it to like the OC or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, it really boils down to just who you are as a wrestler and how you portray yourself when you actually get in the ring, because I think that there's writers and there's pitches and there's stuff like that, you know what I mean? But ultimately I think it really boils down, because I keep saying that, but like I don't think the wrestler like follows that formula to a T, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't think that the New Day, like when they went out there and they were doing the gimmick, I don't think that they really, I'm sure that they followed the script and everything, but the way they are now, I mean, the way that they transitioned into the group that they are now, I feel like that there obviously were some points throughout the gimmick where they were like, all right, well, what if we said it like this? Or what if we did this after we said, you know what I mean? Like, what if we took a couple liberties here and there, you know what I'm saying? And very few people have the ability to do that. And if there's anybody who I feel like has the ability to take liberties with stuff like that, I would argue it's Sami Zayn. I would argue it's Kevin Owens. I would argue it's Chris Jericho. I would argue it's John Cena. Like, there's people within the WWE and AEW, let's be honest, and all over the place, okay? We're not just gonna exclude the rest of the, you know, the rosters all over the world, but specifically in the context of what we're talking about right now, in the context of WWE, there's a lot of people on the roster who I feel like, I wouldn't necessarily say specifically the Oos gimmick, but I mean, again, if you gave it to other people, would it be as successful? And that's a very difficult question to answer, just because it depends on the person. It's hard to really sit down and be like, all right, the crowd is going to love this part. When I say this, the crowd are going to be like, I cannot believe that I was alive and didn't know that this was a thing. I don't know. You have to believe it. You have to be able to look at it and go, this sounds stupid, but I'm going to do what I can to get it over. Because a lot of people will definitely credit you for that. A lot of people will be like, oh, this is a stupid gimmick, but he's doing everything that he can to get it over, to like, you know, push it. You know what I'm saying? So what did we talk about? We talked about WWE not having any plans for Money in the Bank. I didn't think that they were going to, because I don't know how many plans you could have for like 2 matches, but I mean, I guess if you're like booking the match in a certain way, I guess that makes sense. So we're just gonna have to wait and see if it stays a gimmick pay-per-view or if it just shows up on WrestleMania. I don't know. Sergeant Slaughter still thinks that Vince McMahon is still in charge. I mean, sure, you could argue that if you really wanted to, but I don't necessarily know how true that is. It really depends on, you know, who you talk to, I guess, and really what you believe in and where you stand on the whole situation. So I don't know. And Sami Zayn didn't think that the honorary use gimmick was actually going to take off. I mean, you could argue that a lot of the wrestlers who do a lot of the gimmicks thought that they weren't really going to take off. Again, it really depends on who you are, and sort of like you look at it, and it really depends on how you go about executing it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, okay? Hopefully everybody has a wonderful tonight and a wonderful tomorrow, and as always, big hugs. Big hugs all around.